Welcome. Welcome, everybody, to the first of a series of 3 forums featuring candidates who will be on your August 6th primary ballot. I'm Peter Shapiro, a member of the Election Forums Committee of Horizon House and chair of this forum. Questions to the candidates come from the Horizon House community. Thanks to all who participated in that. It is my pleasure now to introduce the moderator of this forum, Neil McReynolds, who will introduce the candidates.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I'd like to add my welcome to the 9 candidates for the 2 statewide races that we are featuring this evening, Secretary of State and Commissioner of Public Lands. Candidates earlier have received the format and the ground rules that we will follow this evening. I will briefly review them so that our audience can anticipate the way the forum will proceed. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. This will be followed by the question and answer period when candidates will have 1 minute to answer each question. At the end of the question and answer period, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Since this is a forum, not a debate, there will not be a rebuttal opportunity. However, candidates may wish to include such remarks in their closing statements, should they wish. Well, candidates, please know we appreciate your honoring the signals of our timers. They will ensure that we are fair to all of you and we can cover as many topics as possible with our questions. Our timers, Doris Ray and Adele Reynolds, are in the front row and will give an on-screen warning sign that will alert you when you have 15 seconds remaining, and you'll get your final signal to finish. Please note that the order in which the candidates will respond to questions has been managed to avoid having any candidate responding in the same order the questions posed. Before moving to the candidates, a brief description of the offices they are seeking might be appropriate. The first half of the evening's program is focused on the Secretary of State, and the second half on the Commissioner of Public Lands. While best known as the state's chief elections officer, the Secretary of State has 12 other primary responsibilities and is second in line of the succession to the office of governor, second after the lieutenant governor. That's the job our 4 candidates are seeking. Now for the opening statement. This is the only question that you have received in advance, so please include your response in the response to the question. That question is, why are you a candidate for Secretary of State? What are your goals, emphasis in this position? And how will you accomplish these goals? For the opening statement only, candidates will be called in the alphabetical order. So let's start with Steve Hobbs. Steve?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to Horizon House. This is the second time I've been here, and thank you for doing this and for the candidates who are putting themselves out there to run. I'm Steve Hobbs, your Secretary of State, and my life has been dedicated to public service. Is one of the reasons why I want to be your Secretary of State, remain so. And I feel we need somebody as Secretary who has the unique lens to access to democracy. For example, as the first person of color to occupy this office and the son of an Asian immigrant, along with being a father of a special needs child, I understand all too well how we can leave people behind and disenfranchise entire communities with advancing policy. As someone who has served 35 years in the Army and is currently serving in your National Guard, I've deployed to 2 conflicts and helped establish free and fair elections. I've also served in the NSA and been trained by the Department of Defense. So I know all too well that democracy is fragile. I'm laser focused on combating cyber and disinformation from overseas malign actors that target our state. So far, my office has expanded its efforts to provide accessible, transparent, and secure elections. Since taking office, we have expanded our cybersecurity team to be more responsive to threats to our 39 county partners. We directly go after disinformation with grassroots and public media campaigns that talk about the life cycle of your ballot. We have made it easier to register to vote with automatic registration of enhanced driver's license, and those who don't drive can register with Social Security number online later this month. To improve transparency, we've included text messaging to inform you of the status of your ballot in real time. Just go to votewad.gov and opt in. I have many other ideas I'd love to share with you all, including discussing the important parts of my office like corporations, libraries, and archives. However, I know we're all hyper-focused on elections, but the office is much more than that, and I hope I can share more during this forum. I hope I can have your support.
Thank you. Marquez Tiggs.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. My name is Marquez, and first and foremost, I'd like to thank every resident of Horizon House and to our moderator, Neil, for hosting this forum. I am running for Secretary of State because I believe in not just preserving our democracy, but ensuring that every voice is heard and every vote is counted. My experience includes community leadership with several nonprofit organizations, including Pierce Seattle, POCAN, board memberships, financial institutions, and more importantly, my military service. Each of these roles has uniquely contributed to my passion for safeguarding our democracy and making me a great fit for this position. In this role, my primary focus will be enhancing voter education through outreach, ensuring election security, and empowering our communities. Considering past elections where numerous ballots were uncounted due to mismatch or missing signatures, I bring a unique solution, creating a 6 to 8 alphanumeric code unique to every Washington state voter. This measure will ensure that all ballots are counted accurately, fairly, and addressing past issues with signature mismatches. I also plan to partner with local organizations to provide comprehensive voter education specifically to underserved communities, reinforcing the importance of every voice in this great state. By implementing policies like same-day registration and extending voting hours, we can make the voting process more accessible and inclusive for everyone. My campaign believes that transparency is vital for building trust in our electoral system. By providing clear, accessible information about the voting process and election results, and by being open and accountable in all of our actions, we can restore and strengthen public confidence. I am committed to creating user-friendly online portals where citizens can access public records, track legislative initiatives, and stay informed about our government activities. Together, these pillars of inclusivity, transparency, and security will help us build a stronger, more resilient democracy for Washington State. I am dedicated to serving with integrity and working together with all stakeholders to achieve these goals. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate you, and I am looking forward to the discussion tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Marquez. Damon Townsend. Damon?
Hi, my name is Damon Townsend. I'm running for Secretary of State because I believe that we should represent all the people of Washington and not just one party. I'm running under the no labels ticket. I don't have a party declaration. I have extensive experience in election administration. It's prepared me for this important role. I served as the election supervisor in Pierce County, a training manager at the Secretary of State's office, and I was the acting manager for 2 other counties in this state during the 2020 presidential election cycle. I've worked very hard as a consultant and as an elections professional to improve election procedures and processes and operations around our great state. The primary goals of Secretary of State will be to enhance election security, transparency, and accessibility. I implemented the first modern tabulation system in Pierce County when I was the election supervisor there, replacing an antiquated system that was in place back from when I was in high school. I also want to ensure that all voters can participate in the process. For example, in March, we had a presidential primary here in Washington State, and 69,000 people in our state attempted to vote in that election and had their ballots thrown in the garbage because of stupid party rules. In fact, at Heritage House, there are 7 citizens who tried to vote in the presidential primary that had their ballots tossed out. Virginia McDermott, Martha Adams, Margaret Barish, Robert Brannigan, Richard Farrar, Erwin Saracen, and Nancy Worsham. Those are folks who live there with you, who are your friends and neighbors, who tried to vote in the presidential primary, and because of the party rules, their ballots were thrown in the garbage. As Secretary of State, I want to make sure that every voter who participates in our elections gets their votes counted, as they should be. To accomplish these goals, I want to use my understanding of election systems and collaborate with experts to develop the best practices. I'm going to advocate for legislation to clear up old laws, and I thank you for the opportunity to meet here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Damon. Next, Dale Whitaker.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm running for Secretary of State because, like many of you, I see voter apathy increasing as it has over the last 3, 4, 5 years. As someone who emigrated here in 2008 and became a citizen in 2015, I really believe that voting is the fundamental civic duty that we must engage with. I think that, kind of touching on what Damon said, the fact that there were over 60,000 ballots that were returned in the presidential primary that were not counted is a huge issue, and we must overcome that. I believe the only way to overcome that is being extremely transparent with our election systems to ensure that every person has faith in the electoral process, that when they drop their ballot off or they mail their ballot, that their voice is going to be heard and that their ballot will be counted. We must absolutely reinstill faith in the electorate that the system is not broken. Currently, there are many statewide and across the nation that don't trust our electoral process. And no matter where you fall on that spectrum, it's absolutely pivotal that we reinstill faith in those folks who don't trust the system. I also am going to lend my 16 years of accounting experience and audit in this office to ensure that we clean the voter rolls, to ensure that only the citizens are voting, and to ensure that residency requirements are reenacted that were just removed from our voter registration forms. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dale. Well, now that that concludes the opening statements. Now we'll move to the questions submitted by Horizon House residents. Each candidate will have a minute to respond to each question and will be called in a rotating order. First question. Do you support Washington's vote-by-mail system? Explain your answer. Marquez, Diggs, you're first.
Yes, I do support it. I mean, and it gives the voters opportunity to vote from home. They can, fill out their ballot right there in their living rooms, and then walk right outside and put it in their mailbox. That's Washington State. That's like one of the things that they're known for when it comes to voting. I think every state in the country should do it. I support it. Yeah, I do support it. I don't think it should go away.
Well, thank you, Marquez.
Yeah.
Okay, Damon Townsend.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of all government services being accessible and easy to use for all the members of the public. And I currently support our vote at home system. Vote by mail doesn't necessarily have to be the end all be all of what we do, but we want to make sure that people who want to participate in the electoral process can do that in any way accessible to them. People should be able to vote in any secure and efficient way that they can that's possible. We currently have the best vote-by-mail system in the state. I helped develop a lot of the procedures for it, and we have a good system for that. We can do better. We got citizens who can't use the mail. We got people who have trouble with getting the mail. We have people who want to go back to polling places. We need to make sure that we make our system accessible and user-friendly and in the way that everybody who wants to participate can use it. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Damon. Next, Dale Whitaker.
Yeah, I think that we absolutely must expand our efforts in ensuring that everyone has accessibility to voting. I think we absolutely must also focus our efforts on securing the mail-in vote system. For example, here in Spokane on April 5th, there were 25 mail-in ballots that were found on the side of the road. So there are some issues that I have personally with the chain of custody with mail-in ballots. For example, a lot of there's over 400,000 ballots that go out of state in the 986 area codes with the 986 prefix that go out of state into Portland, Oregon for sorting before coming back into state. So we absolutely must secure as much as possible and improve accessibility to those folks who need to use mail-in voting, folks that need to go to the ballot box, how I improve the accessibility as much as possible across the board for everyone and anyone so that they can access the voting polls if they want to.
Well, thank you, Dale. Steve Hobbs?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally support mail-in voting. It is very good for the state, very convenient for the voters. Also, we mail the ballots even earlier for those overseas voters. When I served overseas in Iraq, I got a ballot earlier than other people, so I could turn it in on time. It's a very secure system, and with votewa.gov, you can track where your ballot is at. Once it gets to the county, you'll know. Once it's counted, you'll know. If the ballot gets rejected because of lack of signature, you're going to know about it. And so we have a great system in this state, and one that we should keep on going. And look, for those that remember the days of polling, if you want to go down to the election center in your county and vote in person, you can certainly do that. Or at one of our 4 universities, there's drop boxes. 70% of the people use drop boxes actually in the last presidential election. So you have a lot of options, but vote by mail is definitely is one that I fully support.
Thank you, Steve. We'll move to our second question. What should be done about the spread of purposeful deception about elections and election results? Damon Townsend?
Well, the biggest way to fight misinformation is with more information. You got to make sure that you share with people all the aspects of what you're doing. It's important that folks know and they understand that their election process is secure, safe, and they need to know a little bit about how it's actually done. One of the things that we did, I used to be the election supervisor in Pierce County, and we made a bunch of outreach videos to make sure that we shared with our voters how our process worked. We also made sure that we had observers from both political parties, and then we also included independents in our observing process, so to make sure we had people inside to make sure that the process was correct. When it comes to misinformation that's out there in the public, again, I'm not a fan of censoring any free speech. I think it's important that people get to speak their minds and get to say what they want. I don't think you kill information by hiding it. I think you fight misinformation by actually putting out more information. I encourage people to look at more news sources and more sources of data to make sure that they're looking at every process. And you just do things better by making sure people know what's going on. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Damon. And Dale Whitaker.
Yeah, I think that we must be careful about what we label as misinformation and disinformation, but it's absolutely something that must be addressed in the correct way. And I think the best way to do this is with transparency, is encouraging our county auditors to allow people to go through the elections process from start to finish. Allow our election observers to do their job without telling them that they're intimidating poll workers just for looking over their shoulder. I think we just need to be very, very, very transparent in a lot of the issues that we see with election misinformation, disinformation, and election trust would diminish organically. The more open you are and the more transparent you are in the electoral process or even in your personal life with folks, people are more willing to trust you. So I think that we absolutely must reinstill faith and trust in our systems by being more transparent.
Thank you, Dale. Steve Hobbs.
I'm going to agree with Dale. Absolutely. Working with our 39 counties, which we're doing right now, which is why Republican and Democratic county auditors have endorsed my campaign, putting the word out to about the election process, which we used to take for granted. The best way to combat misinformation and disinformation is with the truth. And so we are talking about the ballot process. We are talking about, hey, did you know you can go to your county auditor and see the process going on? That we're part of ERIC, which is the Electronic Registration Information Center. So we share data so that if someone were to pass away, we would know about it. And if their ballot shows up after they passed away, then we would know about it. We check every signature. These are the things that we have taken for granted that we didn't tell anybody. And that's what we have to start doing. Simple things like letting people know tabulation machines are not connected to the internet. Things, again, that we took for granted, we have to talk about. Because I firmly believe that maybe January 6th wouldn't have happened if people would have known how their elections are ran in their state.
Thank you, Steve. Marquez Tiggs.
Yeah, Mr. Hobbs, Mr. Townsend, Mr. Whitaker, they all made great points. They basically summed everything. It sounds like everybody's on the same page on how to, you know, combat misinformation, disinformation. I agree with all of them. You know, transparency, updating social media sites, updating websites, uh, updating websites, educating the voter. Yeah, that's how we can combat misinformation and disinformation about the election process. But like I said, it seems like everybody's on the same page. Everybody's saying the same thing over and over again. It's the same thing over and over. We all agree on how we can combat the misinformation and disinformation. But like I said, I agree with the other three gentlemen. And yeah, I think transparency is the biggest way we can combat those issues. And also, you know, updating our social media websites and our social media handles and our websites to combat that
Well,
issue.
thank you, Marquez. Okay, trying to move on to the third question. What steps would you take to prevent any activities from whatever source from disrupting the standard and timely process of fair voting and vote counting from taking place? We start with Dale Whitaker.
Yeah, I mean, I think that having a very set in stone electoral window, voting window, which we have in most counties, but some counties can extend that. They're allowed to extend it at their discretion. But I think ensuring that the voting windows are very concise and allow us to count within that window only, and speeding up the counting process too, so that we are not having to wait until after election day to find out what the results are. We must instill as much election security as possible, whether that's in person or with Albert sensors and things of that nature, to ensure that there's no security issues from an electronic standpoint and so on. I think one of the big things for me would be expanding security to include cameras on our ballot boxes, so that we know there's no tampering, anything of that nature. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you, Dale. Steve Hobbs.
You know, it's very interesting. The last year since I've been in office for Secretary of State since 21, and we've had two major cyber attacks, white powder incidents. We had an attempt to confuse the voters by someone trying to file two Bob Fergusons in the gubernatorial race. You know, it's like I've seen it all. And we always got to think forward. So, you know, what we've been doing is providing the cybersecurity needed for our counties and coordinating with the U.S. Postal Service and Homeland Security. We provided grants for our counties, $80,000 per year, to help the counties beef up their physical and cybersecurity. We've also given money to the counties so they can get the word out about elections. Again, January 6th wouldn't have happened, I believe, had people known about elections. And so we have done that as well. We also provide any support to the county should they need it on other emergency matters. Sometimes we had someone go down because they were sick, and we can help them out. And we provide the training needed for the county so they can operate their elections.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Marquez Tiggs.
I actually don't have an answer right now. Can we come back? Can I come back to that?
No, not really. We're trying to move on. We need other questions, other candidates. Sorry.
Well, I'll skip this question.
Okay. Damon Townsend.
Yeah, well, it's important for elections that we make sure that we have everything in place to be secure. I mean, we used to do tabletop exercises. One of the things that we need to be prepared for is, we live in a world where there can be natural disasters, there can be all sorts of physical threats, there can be all sorts of things. So our elections offices need to be prepared for things like that. Well, one of the things we did in Pierce County and across the state is we worked on making continuity operations plans for all the different counties so that they could make sure that they could still operate our elections in any way possible. The other thing we need to do is we need to continue to enhance our security, our cybersecurity. We have nefarious actors who are trying to infiltrate our election processes. All of our tabulation systems are not hooked up to the internet. Those are clean and safe. But we do have issues when we do election night transmission of tabulation data. Somebody can intercept that and make people think that the election has been hacked, even though it hasn't, because people need to remember the final election is done when we certify the election, not with the unofficial election results that are shown by the media. Thank you.
Well, thank you. This concludes the questions from residents. Next, we'll move to the final part of the Secretary of State segment of our forum this evening, the closing statements from the candidates. That are 2 minutes maximum. The candidates will be called on in reverse order to their opening statements. First candidate will be Dale Waker.
Yeah, I thank you guys for hosting and the opportunity to speak to you. I understand you guys have a large voter base there. Look, as an immigrant to the United States and someone who truly fundamentally loves the country that we have here, I feel like our country is worth fighting for. I feel like ensuring that we have a trustworthy and accessible electoral process is fundamental to securing our country. For me, I'm overjoyed to have this opportunity to be in the United States, to run for elected office. I'm going to utilize my 16 years of accounting experience to ensure that our elections are free and accessible to all Washingtonians across the state. I hope that you will take a hard look at my campaign at whitakerforwad.com and give me a good look before you cast your ballot on August 6th. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dale. Damon Townsend.
Yeah, well, thank you again for hosting this forum. It's great to have this. So we have an opportunity to do this before the primary. I'm running for Secretary of State because I've worked in elections before. I've certified elections. I've been a certified election administrator. I've been trained and I understand how the process works. I as well have an accounting degree. I've never used my accounting degree for counting money. I used it for counting ballots and making sure that they're appropriately and properly accounted for. And I want to make sure folks like Margaret and Robert and Richard and Erwin and Nancy and the folks of Washington State that want to participate in the election process and they work and they send in their ballots and they don't get their ballots thrown in the garbage because two parties want to have you sign an oath of fealty before you can vote. That is ridiculous. Every candidate in this race has signed an oath of fealty to one party or the other. They have very strong platforms. They are going to follow their platforms. I'm running under no labels. I'm running as an election administrator. I know how to make sure our elections are done properly, and I know how to make sure all Washingtonians, when they participate in this process, get their votes properly counted. I thank you for your vote, and I'd love an opportunity to do this going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Damon. Marquez Tiggs.
All right. Thank you all again to all the residents of Horizon House and to the moderator, Neil, and my fellow candidates for engaging in this conversation. Tonight, I've shared my vision for the future of Washington State's electoral process, one that prioritizes voter education and community empowerment. My biggest thing that I want you all to take away from tonight's discussion from me is that every vote needs to be counted. 60,000 votes being thrown out is unacceptable. It is unacceptable. Election security, voter education, and everything else is important. But the main important thing is that every vote is counted. That's the whole reason why we're here, is that every vote needs to be counted. And thank you all. I appreciate you for tuning in, and also I ask for your support and your vote, and I hope you all have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you, Marquez. Steve Hobbs.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. We've heard a lot from the candidates here, but here's the thing, Marquez talked about more voter outreach and education. You're absolutely right, Mr. Tiggs, and that's why we in our office put in increased funding for voter outreach and education. We have a dedicated person for communities of color, to the rural communities, and hopefully we can expand out to tribal communities, Hispanic, Indian, and African American communities. Dale talked about working more with county auditors. He is absolutely right, which is why we're doing it now with increased funding and working with them to secure their election centers, which is why Republican and Democrat county auditors have endorsed me. Damon, you're absolutely right. Those exercises, those tabletops are really great, which is why we did one just a couple of days ago, actually last week. So we are still doing those. In fact, we're with your former Pierce County. So we are doing those things now, and we can do a lot more. The office is going to continue to think forward and lean forward to combat misinformation, cyber threats, and do more for transparency and access to the ballot box. Look, I've been doing a really good job, and I would love to have your support to continue defending our democracy here in Washington State.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. And thanks to all of you, all four of you, for your participation tonight and your comments and so forth. That appreciates. That's all part of the good part of the election process. Well, it's time to move to the second half of our forum this evening and focus on the candidates for Commissioner of Public Lands. We have 5 candidates with us this evening. One more than we anticipated. Kevin Vanderweg was able to join us, and so that gave us the 5 that we'd hoped to have. And so the question is, what are the responsibilities of the statewide elected official? And the Commissioner of Public Lands is the head of the State Department of Natural Resources, overseeing management of more than 5 million acres of state forest, agricultural, range, aquatic, and commercial lands. The commissioner manages the state's largest on-call fire department, preventing and fighting wildfires on 13 million acres of private, state, and tribal-owned lands. So now for the opening comments. For this item only, we've sent you this question in advance, so please include in your answer your response to the question. Please tell us why you are a candidate for the position of Commissioner of Public Lands, what your goals and emphasis in this position will be, and how you plan to accomplish these goals. For their opening statement only, candidates will be called in alphabetical order. First will be Geraldine Anderson. Was she able to join us? No. Okay, well, we move on to Jamie Herrera Butler.
Thank you. Well, my husband and I are raising our 3 kiddos in what is the path of the Yakult burn, which killed dozens of people and stood for over a century as the largest forest fire in Washington state history. But in just this past decade, that horrible record has already been surpassed 3 times. Fires now run rampant every summer. Too many of our forests are undermanaged or outright neglected, and they are turning into crowded, diseased tinderboxes, just waiting for a spark. So these fires ruin our days with smoke. They emit tons of carbon into the air. They drive up the cost of home insurance, making housing here even more unaffordable. And if you're unfortunate enough to live in the path of one of those fires, they can cause unimaginable heartache. So I'm running for lands commissioner because I'm not going to leave my kids or your grandkids a legacy of burning forests and choking smoke. It was already explained what this job does. One thing I would add to that, this is not a legislative position. It's a statewide executive. It means it's a leadership position. It has to manage about 2,000 DNR employees and millions of acres of state and private lands. And we need someone who's willing to stand up to both political parties to do what's right. I spent a dozen years in Congress fighting to responsibly manage our national forests, to make sure that they are more disease resistant, more fire resistant, to remove those dead and diseased trees that serve as the fuel for the fires that plague us every summer, or to quickly fight the fires when they do occur. And I'll bring those same priorities to our state as lands commissioner. When Washingtonians see our forests, I want them to experience a legacy of health and prosperity. I want them to see a vibrant ecosystem that is full of a diverse array of species and habitat. We live in one of the most amazing states in the nation, and we are resource abundant. It's incredibly important to me to make sure that we pass on that abundance. And some of that means that we need to make sure that we are managing it and that we are good stewards and that we're developing it. I shouldn't say developing, we are doing the stewardship work to make sure that it's healthy. And that is something that we can pass on. And in doing that, we're going to bring some justice and some equity to the rural parts of our state where there aren't other places to get tax revenue to fund public schools, police and fire, basic county services. I think that our environment and our economy are not mutually exclusive. We can actually take care of both, and both can thrive. And that is going to be my aim and my vision if you support me for Commissioner of Public Lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. Sue Kuhl Peterson.
Hi there. It's nice to see all of you, and I appreciate your civic duties being met by you in interviewing all of us. So I am a biologist and a natural resource manager. I had 30 years of working professionally in fisheries research, forest and habitat restoration, salmon harvest. I have a long list. I encourage you to write down my website, citizens4sue.com. Citizens4sue.com will show you my resume and you'll learn more about my background. But I'm the only candidate that has 30 years of natural resource management in a variety of fields. And I've worked at the federal, state, county, and city levels of government. I grew up in Southern Washington along the Columbia River at a salmon hatchery. So I just became totally enthralled with fish and forests. The Gifford Pinchot National Forest pretty much covered our whole county of Skamania, and timber sales in those days were used to fund our schools. The little elementary school I went to, there were 8 kids in my class. We had everything we could possibly need for our education, and now that little school has to be paid, half the costs are paid by the parents. This is because our timber industry, which was the backbone of Washington's state economy for years, is in trouble. I propose to reinvent the timber industry in our state, create private sector jobs in the forest, and this will help reduce the forest fires that we've been seeing for 10 years under Democrat administration.
Thank you, Sue. Dave Up the Grove.
Thank you and good evening. My name is Dave Up the Grove, like 3 words in one, Up the Grove. And you know, our world is changing. We're experiencing the impacts of climate change all around us. We're seeing a loss of biodiversity, plant and animal species. And I'm running for Lands Commissioner to improve the management of our public lands to meet these realities of today. Our kids and grandkids deserve to inherit a healthy planet. And I'm so proud that the environmental community has united behind this campaign. Sole endorsement, Washington Conservation Action, sole endorsement, Sierra Club. And both organizations have announced massive voter mobilization efforts on our behalf. I'm also proud that every Democratic Party organization in the state so far, nearly 50 of them, have backed the environmental community and endorsed this campaign. I'm the only leading candidate not accepting contributions from the timber industry, their corporate executives and lobbyists. I'm the only candidate who will end the destruction of our mature legacy forests. I bring a lifetime of relevant experience, including chair of the House Environment Committee in the legislature, and now chair of the King County Council, and a deep commitment to environmental justice, racial equity, and tribal sovereignty. And I'll break a little glass ceiling as the first out LGBT statewide executive office holder in the history of our state. But with 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans in this race, we are at serious risk of 2 Republicans advancing out of the primary if Democrats don't continue to consolidate behind the environmental community. That's why Democratic leaders like County Executive Dow Constantine, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, Congressman Adam Smith, our state auditor, state treasurer, former Governor Chris Gregoire, and others are supporting this campaign. So I invite you to join the environmental community, Democratic Party, and respected leaders to support this campaign to protect our public lands and ensure a Democrat advances in November.
Thank you, Dave. Next, Kevin Vanderweg.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you to Horizon House for hosting this forum this evening. I know these take a lot of work to put on, and I appreciate you giving us the opportunity to reach out to you. My name is Kevin Vanderweg, and I'm running for Commissioner of Public Lands because I'm concerned about wildfire. We've seen a growth in devastating and catastrophic wildfires in this state. I'm a career firefighter. I work up in Sequim on the Olympic Peninsula, and it's a job I've had for 25 years. I'm also serve in the legislature. I represent the Olympic Peninsula in the legislature, a position I've been in for the last 18 years. And the last 7, I've chaired the Agriculture and Natural Resource Committee in the Senate. I think that makes me uniquely positioned to actually be able to do something about fires, the growth in wildfires. A lot of the candidates you just heard from share my concern, but actually have no plan on what to do to see that they decrease. Every summer, we're all breathing wildfire smoke in August and September. Last year, 350 homes burned down in the state. There was a 48-hour period where the city of Spokane had the worst air quality on planet Earth. And Stanford recently released a study. All the emission work we've done in the last 30 years, or 50% of it, is being negated by wildfire smoke. We need to continue with our sustainable harvest. That keeps our forests healthy, and healthy forests are more resilient to fires. Any good firefighter will tell you the best way to put out a fire is to not let it get started in the first place. And on the forest front, that is reducing the fuel amount. Sustainable harvest is key to that. Professionalizing DNR's firefighting force is something that needs to be done. They're very underappreciated force. And then increasing our prescribed burning. That's nature's way to put out fires, and it's Mother Nature's way to make forests more resilient. We need to work on that. Happy to and excited to answer your questions tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin. Well, thank you for all 4 of you. I appreciate that. This includes our opening statements. We'll move to the questions prepared by Horizon House residents. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to each question on a rotating basis. First question. The Department of Natural Resources is required by statute to manage state-owned aquatic lands, including navigable lakes, rivers, streams, and marine waters. What measures would you promote to improve environmental protection of these waters? Jamie Butler?
Thank you for that. So this is something I tackled while I was in Congress. Would love to bring those priorities here. Along the Columbia River, we have an invasive species of pinnipeds that are eating our wild salmon runs. And actually, it's happening elsewhere in the state. I worked with tribes, I worked with DNR, and actually with a Democrat colleague from across the river to get every member and every governor of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho to support our efforts to remove some of those invasive species that are threatening our salmon runs. And the same thing needs to happen here. On our tidelands, for example, we have shellfish farmers that harvest and grow sustainably local native shellfish, and they are in danger right now from green crab, from eelgrass, and the state DNR is not supporting them. Basically, they're fighting it with one hand tied behind their back. I'll be a leader who will give them political support that they need to do what they want to do, which is pass on sustainably managed, locally sourced aquaculture here in Washington state.
Thank you, Jamie. Sue Cool-Peterson.
Thank you for that question. I started out as a fish biologist growing up at a fish hatchery. So I'm very familiar with some of the fisheries management aspects in Washington state. I believe that hatcheries have been underutilized over the last couple of decades. I think that our salmon life history is super complicated, and those fish have many challenges in their 3 to 4 year life cycle where they migrate all the way around the Pacific Ocean and back to their home streams. I think that hatcheries are a very good way to bring their numbers up. In fact, the hatchery that I lived in and many of the other hatcheries are called mitigation hatcheries because they were built to mitigate any impacts from the dams that were built on our Columbia and Snake Rivers. I studied fish passage at dams, and I can say definitively that we can increase fish numbers in hatcheries and we can solve problems of fish migration at dams. So I'm not in favor of taking out our large dams.
Thank you, Sue. Dave Up the Grove.
Thank you. Our Puget Sound orca, our iconic king salmon, are Washington state treasures that are worth fighting for to protect. And that's why I want to increase the funding and ask the legislature to for the Aquatic Lands Restoration Team at the Department of Natural Resources. They do nothing but work on restoring these aquatic lands, you know, doing things like getting rid of nasty creosote pilings, doing eelgrass planting, things like that that help provide the environment for forage fish that the salmon depend upon. I'd also be interested in exploring what role an expanded aquatic reserve program, obviously in consultation with tribes, could play. And also our forest management decisions on state lands need to be made with these values in mind. I think that's one of the many reasons to complete the riparian habitat restoration work called for in the Habitat Conservation Plan. I don't want our generation to be the generation where we see the end of our iconic king salmon and Puget Sound orca.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah. Kevin VandeWeghe.
Thank you for that question. I think the number one thing the Department of Natural Resources can do on this topic is increase eelgrass. We've done a lot of work with the Department of Natural Resources. The legislature has funded a lot of eelgrass work. Our oceans are becoming toxic. Their ocean acidification is increasing. And that, as ocean acidification takes hold, shellfish can no longer form their shells. And they're critical species in the health of the Salish Sea. The number one issue that we've been found to combat ocean acidification is eelgrass. And although we've done a lot of work in that regard, there's a lot more that can be done, and more eelgrass can be planted, and hopefully that will continue to neutralize ocean acidification and continue to make the Salish Sea healthy.
Thank you, Kevin. And we'll move to our second question. How does climate change influence your approaches to forest and aquatic lands management? Sue Kuhl-Pedersen.
I feel that the biggest risk for climate change are these horrific fires we've had for 10 years. These are twice as hot. These fires are so hot that I didn't even recognize the white smoke we started having in 2014. It's because the fires are about twice as hot as in my youth when I grew up next to the Gifford Pinchot Forest. It was gray and transparent, that smoke. So it's burning the soils, it's burning lots of big trees that are planted too close together. That's because they were supposed to be harvested. They were planted for harvest and those trees got bigger than they were planned for. Now they're crowded, they're thirsty, they get diseased. And those are the problems that we really need to deal with. One of the things I'd like to influence is more segmentation of our blanket of forests. Really needs to be broken into segments so that if it catches on fire, it just burns one segment of the forest instead of millions of acres. So I'm very keen on thinning out the trees, logging, producing timber for lumber. We need more housing, so we've got lots of trees, too many really. So that seems like a good win-win to me.
Thank you, Sue. Move to Dave Up the Grove.
There we go. You know, I think the climate crisis is the biggest threat that we're facing from an ecological standpoint because its consequences are so severe and the threat is upon us now, which is what makes acting with urgency imperative. And the State Department of Natural Resources has a big role to play. Pacific Northwest forests are some of the greatest carbon sinks in the world. And this means we ought to set ambitious carbon storage and sequestration goals in our future plans for the department. It means preserving our mature legacy forests. They're only 3% of our state timberlands, but have an outsized impact on the climate. And it means continuing to always be reevaluating how and how often we harvest. And it means instituting honest carbon accounting as part of the analysis of proposed timber sales. And I know these kind of changes are possible because I've led similar changes in King County. I helped establish a forest carbon program as part of our county land conservation initiative and led successful efforts to stop the destruction of carbon-dense mature forests in King County, including the proposed Wishbone timber sale. King County can't do it alone. DNR needs to urgently catch up.
Thank you, Dave. Kevin Van de Weg. Kevin?
Sorry, I got kicked off.
Okay.
I'm up for that question. So, climate change is obviously something that is concerning. And I think the number one way to do that is continuing with our sustainable harvest. Trees sequester a large amount of carbon. As we sustainably harvest those and lock that carbon up long-term in housing and other lumber products, the environment wins. When we reduce harvests, like other candidates in this race want to do, and walk away from our forests and they burn up, those are huge carbon releases. And that is very unhealthy for the environment. It's been shown over and over again. And so on the climate front, I think the best tool we have is to continue with sustainable harvests of our forests and make sure they're there for future generations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Jamie Butler.
Kevin's right about that. The most amazing tool we have to fight climate change are our trees here in Washington State. But not all trees are the same. Trees are like us. We grow old and we have a life cycle. And if we are able to use in a sustainable way and manage those forests and use that tree before it falls down and releases carbon or burns in a catastrophic fire, we can sequester that carbon in wood products, in homes, in housing. We can decrease the footprint of transporting those materials, and we can sequester that carbon for the life, like 100 years longer than the life of that tree. Old science says tie up a forest and walk away from it. California has 20 years worth of science to show for all their carbon emissions up until 2020. They all went up in smoke in the year 2020 because of the fires. We don't want to see that happen here. If we keep our forests healthy and managed, the communities win because those tax receipts go into our schools to make education more fair, and the forests win because they're more healthy and more vibrant, and they protect more species.
Well, thank you, Jamie. I'll move to our third question. How will you manage state forests to meet the objectives of one, maximizing timber harvest to meet the needs of school construction statewide, and two, maintain a sustainable forest to absorb carbon for a changing climate? Dave Up the Grove.
Thank you. It's important to me that we continue to manage our public lands in ways that benefit the trust beneficiaries. Those are the folks who receive revenue off the land. Our state Supreme Court made it clear a couple of years ago, our responsibility is not just to maximize revenue, it's to manage for the benefit of those beneficiaries, but also recognize a responsibility to the public. I agree we should have sustainable harvest, but I think we also can protect some of our special places and do a better job of protecting the biodiversity and some of the attributes that people find valuable here. That tension is the core tension in this job, whether we're talking timber policy, agriculture, or public lands, is how do we ensure that we are generating appropriate revenue for the beneficiaries, yet staying true to our public values. After all, these are public lands, and we have a responsibility to manage them for a range of benefits, not just revenue generation. I envision a strong, healthy timber industry for a long time to come, but think we can do better.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Kevin Vanderweg.
Thank you for that question. 53% of Washington's forests are offline. They'll never be harvested again. That is a huge environmental victory, and it gives plenty of options for people to use our public lands in any number of ways. DNR really is a jobs creator. It creates jobs and revenue, hundreds of millions of dollars a year by the sustainable harvests that we have in place and have had in place for decades in the state. We have not clear cut. For decades, we have had a timber harvest that has worked in the state since statehood and raised lots of money for all our junior taxing districts and our K-12 public schools. Keeping that in place is paramount. Our surrounding states are dealing right now with a collapse in their industries for the forests, and that is going to result in more fires in our surrounding states. And it is not a situation we want to get into here. So keeping our sustainable harvest in place, meaning it's there for future generations, is the way we create revenue, and it's the way we create jobs.
Thank you, Kevin. Jamie Rattler Butler.
Thank you. So our current commissioner has said very much the same thing as what Kevin just said, which is, we need to harvest the land that was set aside to harvest. And it's less than half of the state trust lands are even harvestable. The rest are set aside appropriately so with habitat conservation plans. Of the 49% that is harvestable, that is supposed to go to public schools, police, fire, local county hospital districts. To keep all of it healthy, we need to do that harvest work in a sustainable way. We've seen what happens on federal forests when it's not done. Those forests are the most rotted. They are the most dead. If you go through there, they're quiet. The species of spotted owl has continued to decline at about 3% per year because that single species approach of just set it aside and walk away hasn't worked. I will not let that happen to our state forests. We want to see them healthy and vibrant so that we can pass them on and their benefits to the next generation.
Thank you, Jamie. Sue Cole Peters Pedersen. Sue, we can't hear you.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I agree that what Jamie said, the picture's not quite as rosy as it might be portrayed by some other candidates. The public land, DNR only manages 12% of Washington state with public land management. And so much of that has been burned up in all the horrific forest fires since 2014. So there's not as much timber that you can still harvest and sell the timber for lumber. I envision a really, really massive statewide education program to show citizens, landowners, how to manage their land so that we reduce the prevalence of these forest fires. We all need to work on this. It's going to take a long time. The best we can do at DNR is get rid of the fuel, the fuel for fires that are just too much fuel for the area they're planted in.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. Moving on to our fourth question. Given the rise in forest fires in our state, especially on the western side, what strategies will you consider in fighting fires in state forest? Kevin Vanderwood?
I really have a four-point plan to work on decreasing the amount of wildfires we have. One thing I already mentioned, keeping up with sustainable harvest, that keeps our forests healthy. And healthy forests are more resilient to fire. Number two is professionalizing DNR's firefighting staff. They are underpaid and underappreciated. Their morale is low. All of those need to improve. I work with them on a fairly fairly common basis, unfortunately, and there's a lot of leadership work there that needs to happen. Number three, increasing prescribed burning. We're doing prescribed burning on about 10,000 acres per year. In the state, it should be more like 100,000 acres per year. We can do that. I've pushed from the legislative DNR to do that. They commonly cite our federal clean air permit. We can do it within and stay in compliance with that. Fourth thing is increasing the relationship between Department of Corrections and DNR. There are inmate work crews right now that go out and do firework. That program can be expanded to do forest health treatment and prescribed burning. It's a great program and has lots of room for growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave Up the Grove.
You threw me in the order there. Wildfire prevention and response needs to be a top priority, not only for public safety, but also for our public health. The smoke we've all, I think, experienced from recent wildfires here on the west side creates health risks, and it does so disproportionately on seniors, other marginalized communities. That's why we've got to do more to continually improve our prevention efforts. I agree, we need a greater emphasis on prescribed burns, as well as non-commercial and commercial thinning to not just manage wildfire prevention, but also forest health. I want to expand that forest health work from Eastern Washington and grow it substantially also into Western Washington. I think as we do that, we need to also pursue effectiveness monitoring to get better information about how these different forest health preventative treatments impact wildfire behavior. I also think it's important to recognize the importance of things like routine maintenance, invasive weed management as contributing to that ecological resistance. At the end of the day, I think it's important to listen to our fire professionals and fight like heck to get them the resources to do their jobs.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, Sue Cool Patterson.
So I ran for this office in 2020 against the incumbent, and she was very, very focused on firefighting. Reasonably so, because we were getting more and more huge fires. I emphasize prevention to her many times. We debated 8 times on Zoom meetings like this, and I just kept hammering the importance of fire prevention. She won that election, but the very next legislative session, the legislature passed House Bill 1168 in 2021, which is full of prevention ideas. Many of them were things that I talked about with the incumbent. And I feel that the schedule for accomplishing these fire prevention ideas are a little bit minimized. It's too little too late. 70,000 acres in 10 years. I think we need to involve the Forest Service, tribes, timberland owners, the public, and just really try to get a handle on the fire risks that were presented with. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Jamie Herrera Butler.
Thank you. I do think we have to get ahead of the fires in terms of prevention, which means doing the silviculture work. That means we need more people who can work at mills. We don't have the current infrastructure, so that's going to take some public-private partnerships, maybe some work with community colleges to have in these rural areas job programs and job training programs. We must increase the prescribed burns. Tribes have been doing this for way longer than when we've been here. And I think we need to work with our federal partners to make sure that we're pulling down those resources to work on state lands. We also need to make sure that we're responding to each region, so that if a region in Southeast or Southwest Washington needs to respond immediately, they're not waiting for a 2-hour turn from the west side of the state headquarters to give them a yes. They need to have contracts and contractors locally that can be rapid responders to keep a fire from getting out of control. That's one of the things they shared with me when I met with them earlier this summer. And mostly we need someone who can stand up to the political pressures, because everything people are talking about, they're good things, but you're going to have to fight special interests to get this done. It's something I've proven I can do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jamie. Move on to the next question. What is the relationship between the State Lands Commissioner and federal agencies with regard to preventing and suppressing forest fires? Should this relationship be changed? Kevin?
Great question. I think the only change that needs to happen is for the federal government to, I guess, be more aggressive. In my experience, and I think the experience of most people at DNR, working with the feds is difficult, including on the suppression front. Their forests are unhealthy, and they don't do a good job of managing them. And that, frankly, if we reduce our harvest in the state, we're gonna be right there with them. I live on the edge of the Olympic National Park, and the park, to their credit, has a no. They like to have forest burn. They feel it is healthy, and only actually choose to put out fires when they absolutely have to. Last year, they had 8 lightning strike fires, fires, and they were forced to put out 3 of them. They've never had to do that before. I bring that up because it just goes to show forests that used to be resilient to fire are no longer resilient to fire. We need to continue with the sustainable harvest, and that is the best way to keep our forests healthy.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Sue Kuhl-Pedersen.
Thank you. I agree with much of what Kevin just said. We do need to keep up with the forest management. Like, I keep going back to my youth when we had thriving timber industry and folks went out and thinned the forest all the time, and we didn't have trees as big and crowded as we have now. We're going to have to do a lot of work to get our forest back to a reasonable distribution of sizes of trees. And also increasing the species in our forests. They're kind of monoclonal Douglas fir through much of our state. The federal government owns about 28.5% of Washington, whereas the state owns about 12%. And I've heard people say that the state has been so irresponsible with their forests that they almost just let them burn so that they don't have to deal with the management of the forest. That's not the way we want to go. We need to be vigilant and involve everybody, all the landowners, in improving the health of our forests and grazing lands too.
Thank you, Sue. Dave Up the Grove.
Thank you. I know there is close coordination right now. There's even an organization, the Pacific Northwest Wildfire Coordination Group, that seeks to bring together the different land management agencies to share resources and information. But I agree, we need to enhance communication and coordination. I think with more robust communication channels, I think we can do more joint training programs, including, trying to increase the frequency and scope of those training exercises. I think we need more collaborative planning, long-term planning for fire management, including, joint development of fire management plans and risk assessments, I think can help everyone. And the more we can integrate our technologies, we do a lot of, there are folks doing satellite monitoring. We have some of the best technology in the state of Washington, and the data analytics. And I think there's a lot we can do in partnership there. These political boundaries are artificial when it comes to ecosystems and forests, and we need to all be working together to make sure we're doing everything to prevent wildfires.
Thank you, Dave. Jamie Herrera Butler.
So in 2018, there was legislation that I helped work on it's called Good Neighbor Authority and Stewardship Contracting. And both of these are tools that the feds have given to the states where there are state managers to do things like hazardous fuels reduction, help with timber sale, wildlife habitat restoration. And I think we need to capitalize on those because we're one of the few states that actually has a statewide elected. This is an appointed position. So this DNR commissioner has the ability to pull down more funds, more resources from the feds to do work not just on our state lands, but on our federal lands. So some of the work that the federal bureaucracy hasn't been able to do in the Forest Service, the state commissioner can actually do. So we don't have to pretend like there is a political divide between state lands, private lands, and federal lands, because fire knows no political boundary. So pulling down those resources and taking a collaborative approach, quite frankly, to make sure that work's getting done. It doesn't really matter who gets the credit. It matters that it gets done so that we can protect it and utilize it.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Okay, this concludes our questions from the residents. It's time for the closing statements from candidates. There'll be 2 minutes maximum. The candidates will call upon in the reverse order from their opening statements. First candidate will be Kevin Vanderweg.
Fantastic. Thank you again for hosting this forum. I think we all appreciate it. I certainly do. I will make sure you get my information for our campaign. We're going to ship it over to Horizon House. And please, it has my cell phone number on it. If anybody has any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out anytime. Happy to answer them. I'm Kevin Vanderweg, and I'm running for Commissioner of Public Lands because I'm concerned about fire. And I'm the only one that actually has the background and a plan to do something about fire that's in this race. As I mentioned, I'm finishing up a 25-year career as a firefighter in SWEM and served the last 18 years in the Washington State Legislature. I want to work to continue sustainable harvest, increase the amount of prescribed burning we do, professionalize DNR's firefighting staff, and increase the relationship that we have with the Department of Corrections, get more inmates out in nature, which for them also proves to be mentally healing and gives them some money in their pocket. So they're more likely to be successful when they finish their term. And they're great. They love to go out and work on fires, do prescribed burning, and forced health treatments. Those are my ideas to be able to suppress fires as much as we can. And that also creates hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for the state and local governments. And it creates thousands of jobs. I'd appreciate your vote. And as I mentioned, you'll have my cell phone number. Anybody can feel free to reach out and ask me more questions. Thank you so much.
Did we lose our host?
It looks like his screen has frozen. Who remembers the order? Let's go
Are we going backwards or
backwards, yeah.
I think that would be me. I think, about 15 years ago, my father unexpectedly lost his vision. He went blind. And one summer, a few years back, I set my alarm clock for 4:30 in the morning. I scooped him up in Burien and we drove up to Seattle and jumped into the cold water of Lake Washington and swam a half a mile. Then we got on a tandem bicycle, those bicycles built for two, and pedaled 12.5 miles. And then with my dad at my side, we ran a 5K. And my father, at age 75 and blind, successfully completed Seattle's Seafair Triathlon. And as we came across the finish line that morning, I realized my dad was demonstrating a powerful truth. And it is this: working together, we can overcome any obstacle. And as your next lands commissioner, I'll work together with the legislature, local governments, federal government, industry, labor, and the environmental community to resolve conflicts and advance a positive agenda for our public lands. And I'll fight for our democratic institutions in the process. After all, these lands don't belong to industry. They belong to we the people. They're public lands. They're our lands. And working together, we can make sure a Democrat advances to November and send a clear message that in order to have good jobs and a strong economy, we need to keep Washington State a great place to live. I invite you to visit my website to learn more and ask you to consider a contribution. The website is upthegrove.org, upthegrove.org. My name is Dave Upthegrove, and I ask for your vote.
Okay, next, Sue Pedersen.
Thank you. Thank you for this story, Dave. That was nice. So I agree, we need to work together. My focus will be on the fact that the DNR and the state control 12% of this state, but the fires go anywhere they want. And we really, really need to get control of the health of the forest, thin things out where there's too much fuel. This also affects water because if you have too many crowded trees, they're drinking more water than normal, which takes water away from the ground, the aquifers in the ground and the salmon in the streams, which means less fish for the orcas. I mean, I am always thinking about how all this is interrelated. So the focus on just DNR lands, I think that has to change and to create a bigger big picture view of Washington State, whether it's forests or grazing lands, the propensity for fires and the huge damage that fires cause to our air quality, the climate, it's all interrelated. I see it as a huge project that I am so incredibly ready to start planning and getting people involved. That's my goal. And my background is well suited to this because I've been a 30-year natural resources manager, a professional. I have a master's in public administration. I've worked at all levels of government. I'm not going to give up until we really make a difference in people's lives. The other thing is firefighting is a cost that taxpayers are sharing in, and I want to reduce their burden for firefighting. Thank you so much for the time to speak today, and it's been really a good experience. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sue. Okay, and Jamie Herrera Butler.
Thank you. So I would propose that folks realize that it's been 10 years, more than 10 years of single party control in this office. And what do we have to show for it? We have increasing fires, not less, and they're hotter and they're more catastrophic. They're not natural. And that's because of failed forest policy. We now know that we can use 21st century technology and innovation to meet 21st century climate change needs. And we have to do that, or we're going to see a continued decline of our forests and our forestry resources and all of the species, including the endangered American wayjourner, who depend on those forests. I am the candidate who has proven that I will stand up to special interests, to my party, to the other party, to anyone when it comes to doing what's right for the people who elect me. And part of that is because I know it takes leadership to do the hard things. And we do need a course correction. I want to fight climate change. I don't want to succumb to it. And I believe that what you're hearing from some of the candidates is they want to double down on failed policies. We honestly, this is an inflection point. We can't just wait and hope that setting more things aside works. It hasn't worked for the past decade. I want Washingtonians to see forests that are vibrant. I want them to experience a legacy of health and prosperity, not burning forests and choking smokes. So working with tribes, with scientists, with landowners, with sportsmen, with forestry and conservation groups, I will help restore health to Washington's forests with a science-backed approach so that our diverse array of species and habitats can thrive. And I will never forget that public land belongs to all the people of Washington. I will make sure that everyone has a seat at the table to preserve recreational access to our public lands. Look, this is a question of leadership. It's not a legislative position. It's not even a local position. This is a position that's going to take someone who's willing to stand up to the bureaucracy and the politics to do what's right. We live in the most beautiful state in America, and I'm running for Lands Commissioner to keep it that way. Thank you, and I ask for your vote, jamieforlands.com.
Thank you, Ms. Butler, and thanks to all the candidates. Special thanks to our moderator who had technical difficulties just at the very end, Neil McReynolds, and Doris Ray, chair of the Questions Subcommittee. On the next 2 Mondays, we will be presenting 4 more sets of candidates who will be on the August 4 primary ballot. Our July 8 candidates for Seattle City Council and State Representative will be answering questions live in Anderson Hall. On July 15, we'll be presenting via Zoom candidates for 2 more statewide offices, the Commissioner of Public Education and the State Insurance Commissioner. We use Zoom for statewide races to accommodate all candidates wherever they live or work. We've had representatives from Eastern Washington, Southwest Washington, and Olympic Peninsula here this evening, and we're so glad we're able to have them participating in this forum. So we invite viewers to join us again at 7:30 on Mondays, July 8 and July 15, the next 2 Mondays, for these important forums. Your Election Forums Committee produces these events because we believe, as you do, that free and fair elections are the foundation of our democracy. We do our best to bring all candidates to our audiences. We make numerous attempts through many channels and personal contacts to gain participation of them all. But understandably, not all candidates are able to attend these forums. The life of a candidate is arduous and extremely busy. It's a selfless, hard work that embodies the values of our society: truth, candor, and devotion to the spirit of democracy. We thank the candidates who have joined us in this endeavor. We support you in your goal of bringing your voice and views to the voting public. And thanks to our viewers who have invested their time watching this forum. You are silent now. Make your voices heard on August 6th. Thank you all.